Tonight, as you settle in, let the world outside soften its edges. The day, with its lists and its demands, can finally recede, leaving only the quiet space you occupy right now. Feel the weight of the blanket, the gentle pressure of the pillow. Notice the air in the room, still and cool, carrying only the faint, familiar sense of your own space. This is a time for stillness, a time when curiosity can take its time, unhurried by the need for answers. In this quiet, we can ask questions that are too large for the daylight hours. They are questions not meant for debate or for argument, but for contemplation. They are questions that act like keys, unlocking doors to rooms we rarely visit in our own minds. And the question we are going to sit with tonight together is a simple one, but it holds within it the story of everything we know. It is this: what if we never evolved? Just let that question hang in the air for a moment, not as a problem to be solved, but as a gentle hum, a starting note for a long and peaceful exploration. It's a question that seems, at first, to be about us, about humans, about our journey from single cells to sentient beings who can lie in the dark and ponder our own existence. And it is about that, of course, but it is also about so much more. It's about the planet itself. It's about the air you are breathing, the steady pull of gravity holding you in place, the silent dance of the continents over millions of years. Evolution isn't just a biological story of apes and ancestors. It is a planetary story, a story of systems learning, adapting, and changing over immense stretches of time. It is the story of how stability is built, how resilience is earned, and how complexity emerges from the simplest of rules. So tonight we are not going to tell a science fiction story of a world without people. We are going to use this question as a lens, a way of seeing the world we know with fresh eyes. By wondering about a world that did not change, we can begin to appreciate in a deeper and calmer way the incredible, subtle, and ceaseless processes of transformation that have made our world and us possible. There is no test at the end of this journey. There is no conclusion you must reach. There is only the process of looking, of wondering, and of allowing your mind to drift through the deep, quiet corridors of time, all while you rest, right here, right now. The story is already happening, all around you and within you. We are just learning how to listen to it. Before we begin our journey into the deep past and the vast planetary systems that hold us, let's establish the ground rules for our exploration. Think of this not as a lecture, but as a shared thought experiment. Our central question, what if we never evolved, is not a trigger for a single, definitive answer. It is a tool. It is a way of isolating certain processes to see them more clearly, much like a scientist might use a stain to make a cell visible under a microscope. Our goal tonight is not to arrive at a final verdict, but to wander through a landscape of possibilities, to notice the connections between things we might have thought were separate, and to develop a richer, more nuanced appreciation for the world as it is. We will be working with models, which are simplified representations of reality. A model is like a map. It is not the territory itself, but it can be incredibly useful for navigating. A map of a forest doesn't show every single tree or leaf, but it shows the relationships between rivers, mountains, and trails, allowing you to find your way. Similarly, the models we explore tonight of climate, of biology, of geology, are not perfect replicas of the real world. They are conceptual tools designed to highlight certain relationships and dynamics. We will proceed with a spirit of generous skepticism. This means we will hold our ideas lightly. We will examine evidence, but we will also acknowledge the limits of that evidence. Science, at its best, is a process of inquiry, not a collection of settled facts. It is a conversation that has been going on for centuries and will continue long after we are gone. We are simply joining that conversation for a little while tonight. We will make a conscious effort to avoid the trap of teleology, the idea that evolution has a purpose or a destination. It is a natural human tendency to see a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end, with ourselves positioned as the grand finale. But the processes we will be discussing are not goal-oriented. They are systems of feedback, of cause and effect, of adaptation and response, unfolding without a final chapter in mind. Life, and indeed the planet itself, is not striving to become anything in particular. It is simply responding moment by moment, millennium by millennium, to the conditions at hand. And finally, we will move slowly. The pace of this exploration is designed for rest. If a concept feels complex, we will take our time with it. We will use analogies and simple language, not to dumb things down, but to build an intuitive understanding. The aim is not to memorize facts, but to feel the texture of these ideas, to let them settle. So with these guardrails in place, inquiry over certainty, models as tools, and a slow, gentle pace, we can begin. We are creating a space for curiosity to breathe, free from pressure. A space where we can ask a very big question and simply listen for the echoes, letting them guide us deeper into the story of a world in constant, quiet motion. So let's begin where we are, right now, in this room. Take a moment to feel the physical reality of your surroundings. The space you are in is not an abstract concept. It is a tangible place. Notice the temperature of the air on your skin. Is it cool, warm, or somewhere in between? That air has a specific composition, a little over 20% oxygen, mostly nitrogen, with traces of other gases. That precise mixture is not an accident. It is a product of billions of years of geological and biological activity, a planetary breath exhaled by volcanoes and forests, algae and oceans. The oxygen you are drawing into your lungs at this very moment is a legacy of ancient life. Feel the stillness in the room. Even in the most profound quiet, there are sounds. The low hum of an appliance, the distant whisper of traffic, the sound of your own breathing. Each of these sounds travels through the medium of the air, a substance dense enough to carry vibrations, but light enough for you to move through effortlessly. This specific atmospheric pressure is another finely tuned parameter of our world, a consequence of our planet's size, its gravity, and its history. Now bring your attention to the materials around you, the fabric of your sheets or blanket, the wood of a nearby piece of furniture, the glass in the window. Each of these materials has a story. The cotton in the sheets grew in a field, a product of soil, sunlight, and water. The wood is a record of a tree's life, its rings marking the passage of seasons. Even the glass is made from sand, silica, forged in ancient stars and delivered to Earth billions of years ago, then melted and reformed by human hands. You are surrounded by transformed matter, by things that have undergone their own kind of evolution. And then there is your own body. Feel its weight, the gentle but persistent pull of gravity that gives you a sense of place, of up and down. This gravitational field is a function of the Earth's mass and density, a constant presence that has shaped every living thing on this planet. It has dictated the strength of our bones, the design of our circulatory systems, the very way we perceive and move through the world. Every beat of your heart, every breath you take, is a conversation with these fundamental physical realities. This grounding in the present moment is our starting point. It is our anchor, because the immense abstract story of planetary evolution is not something that happened only in the distant past. It is happening now. It is written in the air you breathe, the materials you touch, and the very substance of your body. The world is not a static stage on which the drama of life unfolds. The world is a participant. It is an active, dynamic system, and you are an inseparable part of it. As we journey back through deep time, we will always return to this present, sensory reality. The questions we ask about the past are ultimately questions about how this moment came to be. The question of why things evolve, or what might happen if they didn't, matters beyond simple curiosity. It touches upon the very nature of stability and existence, from the scale of our own lives to the lifespan of the planet itself. On a human timescale, we often crave permanence. We build institutions, relationships, and homes with the hope that they will last. We seek stability in our health, our finances, and our communities. Yet we live in a world defined by change. Our bodies are in a constant state of flux, cells dying and being replaced. Our minds learn and forget, our perspectives shifting with experience. The seasons turn, climates shift, and societies transform. The process of evolution, in its broadest sense, is simply the mechanism by which systems respond to this relentless pressure of change. A system that cannot adapt, that cannot evolve, is brittle. When faced with a new challenge, a change in temperature, a new predator, a different food source, a static system has only one response: to break. A dynamic, evolving system, however, has a vast library of potential responses. It can change its behavior, its structure, its very chemistry to meet the new reality. So, on a personal level, understanding evolution is understanding the dance between stability and change, persistence and adaptation. It is the story of how to endure in a world that never stands still. Now let's zoom out, far out, to the scale of the Earth itself. Our planet has not always been the temperate blue and green world we know today. It has been a molten ball of rock, a water world, a snowball covered in ice from pole to pole, and a hothouse with jungles at the poles. Through all these dramatic transformations, life has persisted. It has not only survived, it has actively participated in shaping the planet. The oxygen in our atmosphere, the chalk cliffs of Dover, the vast deposits of coal and oil, all are monuments to the power of life to transform its own environment. This is a planetary-scale feedback loop. Life changes the planet, and the changed planet, in turn, selects for new forms of life. This co-evolution of the living and non-living parts of the Earth is what has maintained a degree of stability over billions of years. It's a concept known as homeostasis, the tendency of a system to maintain a stable, constant condition. But this is not the static stability of a rock. It is a dynamic, negotiated stability. It's more like the process of riding a bicycle, a series of constant small adjustments and corrections to maintain balance while moving forward. A world without evolution would be a world without this capacity for adjustment. It would be a planet vulnerable to every cosmic and geologic shift, with no ability to self-regulate. A slight change in the sun's output, a large volcanic eruption, or an asteroid impact could send the climate into an irreversible spiral, becoming a runaway greenhouse like Venus or a frozen desert like Mars. The stakes, then, are not just about the existence of humans or any particular species. The stakes are about the persistence of habitability itself. Our question, what if we never evolved, is another way of asking, how is the world able to remain a home for life over geological time? And what does that tell us about our own place within that resilient, ever-changing system? As we move forward, we will be weaving together several threads of inquiry. Think of them as different paths leading up the same mountain, each offering a unique perspective on the landscape we are exploring. It's helpful to know what these paths are in advance, so you can recognize them when we encounter them. We won't follow them in a straight line, we'll move between them, allowing them to inform one another. The first thread we will pick up is the idea of feedback loops. These are the engines of both change and stability in any complex system, from your own body to the global climate. We will explore how simple rules of interaction, when repeated millions of times, can lead to incredibly complex and self-regulating patterns. We'll look at how a system can maintain its balance, but also how it can be pushed past a tipping point into a completely new state. We'll return to this idea of feedback again and again, as it is fundamental to understanding how a system can learn and adapt without any conscious intent. A second thread will be the concept of deep time. The human mind is not well equipped to grasp the immense timescales over which geological and biological evolution operate. 1,000,000 years is a number we can write down, but it's almost impossible to feel. We will use analogies, and mental exercises to try and stretch our sense of time to appreciate the slowness, the patience of these planetary processes. Understanding deep time is crucial because it reveals that what appears stable to us in our fleeting lifespans is, in fact, in slow, constant motion. Mountains rise and fall, oceans open and close, and species emerge and vanish in a silent, epic drama. We will need to adjust our internal clock to see this world clearly. Finally, a third thread we will revisit is the relationship between the hardware and the software of our planet. The hardware is the physical stuff, the rocks, the water, the chemistry of the atmosphere, the laws of physics. The software is the information, the patterns, the codes that life uses to operate within that hardware, things like DNA, ecological relationships, and even learned behaviors. The story of evolution is the story of how this software has been written and rewritten over eons to run ever more complex programs on the same basic planetary hardware. We will explore how the constraints of the hardware shape the possibilities for the software and how the software, in turn, can sometimes modify the hardware itself. Keep these three ideas in mind: feedback loops, deep time, and the interplay of hardware and software. They will be our signposts, our recurring themes as we venture deeper into our central question. We will now begin to unpack them one by one. To have a meaningful conversation, we need to agree on what our words mean, at least for tonight. So let's take a moment to define a few key terms in plain language, stripping away the jargon so we can focus on the core ideas. The first and most important term is, of course, evolution. For our purposes, we will use a very broad definition. Evolution is not just about biology, about monkeys and man. It is any process of gradual change and adaptation in a system over time. Under this definition, a star evolves as it burns through its fuel. A language evolves as new words are created and old ones fall out of use. A mountain range evolves as it is pushed up by tectonic forces and worn down by erosion. And of course, life evolves through natural selection. The common thread in all these examples is a mechanism for change and a mechanism for selection or persistence. Some variations arise, and the ones that work better in their given environment tend to stick around. So when we ask, what if we never evolved? We are imagining a world where this fundamental process of adaptive change is absent, not just for life, but for the planet as a whole. A static world. Next, let's clarify what we mean by a system. A system is simply a set of interconnected parts that work together to form a complex whole. Your body is a system of organs, cells, and chemical signals. A forest is a system of trees, fungi, animals, soil, and water. The Earth's climate is a system of oceans, atmosphere, ice caps, and sunlight. The crucial idea here is interconnectedness. In a system, you can't change one part without affecting the others. The relationships between the parts are just as important as the parts themselves. Much of our journey tonight will be about understanding the Earth not as a collection of separate things, but as a single, integrated system. This brings us to the concept of feedback, which we mentioned earlier. A feedback loop is the mechanism through which a system regulates itself. There are two main types. A negative feedback loop is stabilizing. It works like a thermostat. When the room gets too hot, the thermostat turns the furnace off. When it gets too cold, it turns it on. The system's output, heat, feeds back to regulate its own behavior, keeping the temperature stable. Most of the systems that keep our bodies and our planet habitable rely on negative feedback. In contrast, a positive feedback loop is amplifying. It creates a runaway effect. A classic example is the melting of Arctic ice. White ice reflects sunlight back into space. As the climate warms, some of that ice melts, revealing darker ocean water underneath. This dark water absorbs more sunlight, which warms the ocean further, which melts more ice, and so on. The process accelerates. Positive feedback loops can drive rapid, dramatic changes in a system. Understanding the balance between these two types of feedback is key to understanding both the stability and the sudden shifts in Earth's history. For our thought experiment, a world without evolution would be a world without these adaptive feedback mechanisms. It would be a world that could not correct its course or respond to new information. It would be a simple, linear world of cause and effect, without the complexity and resilience that feedback provides. To situate our question, we need a brief, simplified snapshot of our planet's history. Let's imagine the entire 4.5 billion year story of the Earth compressed into a single calendar year. On this scale, the Earth forms on January 1st. For the first few months, it's a chaotic place, bombarded by asteroids and comets, its surface a sea of molten rock. The Moon is formed during this violent period, likely from a collision with a Mars-sized object. Sometime in late March or early April in this compressed year, the first signs of life appear. These are not animals or plants, but incredibly simple, single-celled organisms, likely huddled around volcanic vents deep in the oceans. For the next several months, all of spring, all of summer, and into the fall, these microbes are the only form of life on the planet. This is a crucial point. The vast majority of Earth's history has been a microbial one. These tiny organisms are not just a footnote, they are the architects of our world. Around mid-July, some of these microbes, called cyanobacteria, figure out a new trick: photosynthesis. They learn to use sunlight to make energy, and as a waste product, they release a highly reactive, toxic gas called oxygen. For them, it's just waste. For the rest of the planet, it's a catastrophe and an opportunity. This great oxidation event slowly transforms the entire chemistry of the atmosphere and oceans, killing off many other forms of microbial life, but paving the way for organisms that could breathe oxygen. The calendar continues to turn. It isn't until mid-November that the first complex multicellular life appears, things like sponges and strange fern-like creatures on the seafloor. The famous Cambrian explosion, a burst of evolutionary creativity that gave rise to most of the major animal groups we see today, doesn't happen until the first week of December. The dinosaurs arrive on the scene around December 15th and dominate the world for the next 2 weeks. They are wiped out by an asteroid impact on the evening of December 26th. The first recognizable human ancestors don't appear until the afternoon of December 31st. All of recorded human history, the pyramids, the Roman Empire, the Industrial Revolution, the device you are listening to this on, takes place in the last minute before midnight. This exercise in deep time is humbling. It shows us that our existence is a very recent development on a very old planet. But it also shows that the world we inhabit was built layer by layer over immense stretches of time by processes we are only just beginning to understand. The stability of our climate, the composition of our air, the very ground beneath our feet are all legacies of this long, slow evolutionary journey. When we ask, what if we never evolved, we are asking, what would happen if you pulled a thread from the very beginning of this tapestry? Would the whole thing unravel, or would a different pattern have emerged? This is the landscape we are now ready to explore. Let's begin our first track of evidence by looking at patterns at a scale we can intuitively grasp, the human scale. Think for a moment about the branching pattern of a tree. A thick trunk splits into large branches, which split into smaller branches, then into twigs, and finally into the delicate veins on a single leaf. Now picture a river system as seen from above. A mighty river is fed by smaller tributaries, which are themselves fed by countless streams and creeks. It's the same branching pattern. Now look at your own hand. The network of veins and arteries that carry blood through your body follows a similar logic. Large vessels branching into smaller and smaller ones to deliver oxygen to every cell. This pattern is everywhere in nature. It's in the structure of a lightning bolt, the growth of a coral reef, the shape of a snowflake, and the neural pathways in your brain. This is not a coincidence. It's an example of convergent evolution, where different systems facing a similar problem independently arrive at the same solution. The problem in this case is one of distribution. How do you efficiently transport resources, water, nutrients, blood, energy from a central source to a large area or volume. The branching network, known as a fractal pattern, is the most efficient mathematical solution to this problem. It maximizes surface area and minimizes the energy needed for transport. The mechanism here is simple trial and error, repeated over countless iterations. For the tree, a slightly more efficient branching pattern meant more sunlight on its leaves, more energy, and a better chance of survival and reproduction. For the river, water flows along the path of least resistance, carving channels that naturally form the most efficient drainage network. For our circulatory system, individuals with a more effective way of delivering oxygen to their muscles would have been better able to survive and pass on their genes. In each case, the system learns and remembers the optimal solution without any conscious thought or design. It's an emergent property. The pattern is not imposed from the top down, it arises from the bottom up, from simple, local rules. Now let's connect this to our core question. A world without evolution would be a world without these elegant, optimized patterns. Imagine trying to design a circulatory system from scratch without the benefit of this evolved template. You might try a simple grid or random tubes. The result would be incredibly inefficient, with some areas receiving too much blood and others not enough, requiring a massive amount of energy to pump. The same would be true for the tree and the river. The world would be clunky, inefficient, and full of poorly solved design problems. The branching pattern is a form of embodied information, a piece of wisdom learned by the system itself over time. It demonstrates that evolution is not just about creating new species, it's about finding elegant solutions to fundamental physical and geometric problems. So as you lie there, think about the branching network of nerves that connects your brain to every part of your body, the branching airways in your lungs that bring in the oxygen. You are a living archive of these beautifully solved problems. What other fundamental patterns might exist, not just in biology, but in the very structure of our planet, learned and perfected over deep time? The implication of this first track of evidence, the prevalence of optimized patterns like branching networks, is profound and subtle. It suggests that the universe has a certain grain to it, a set of preferred solutions to common problems. If the problem is distribution, the solution tends to be a fractal network. If the problem is how to build a strong, lightweight structure, the solution often involves hexagons like in a honeycomb or a diatom shell. If the problem is how to pack spheres most efficiently, there is a specific geometric arrangement that emerges. This pushes us to reconsider what we mean by evolution. Perhaps it's not a process of infinite possibility, but a search process that is guided and constrained by the fundamental laws of physics, geometry, and information. The world isn't a blank canvas on which anything can be painted. It's more like a landscape with valleys, rivers, and mountains. The water will always tend to flow downhill, finding its way into the valleys. In the same way, evolving systems will tend to discover and settle into these mathematically stable, efficient solutions. Let's test the boundaries of this idea. What happens when the environment changes dramatically? Does the system have to start its search for a solution all over again? Not necessarily. One of the remarkable things about these evolved patterns is their resilience and adaptability. A branching network, for example, is inherently robust. If one small twig on a tree dies, the rest of the tree is fine. If a small stream in a river delta gets blocked, the water simply finds a new path through the existing network. The system has built-in redundancy and flexibility. It can handle local failures without a catastrophic collapse of the entire system. This is a key feature of complex adaptive systems. They don't just find a single, perfect solution for a static environment. They find solutions that are good enough across a range of potential environments and are resilient to minor perturbations. A world without this evolutionary process would lack this robustness. Any small change could lead to a total system failure. Imagine a transportation grid where the failure of one small road brings the entire city to a halt. That's the kind of brittle, unevolved world we are contemplating. So the implications go beyond mere efficiency. Evolution doesn't just produce optimal designs, it produces resilient and adaptive ones. It builds systems that can bend without breaking, that can learn from stress, and that can persist through changing times. This principle applies at all scales, from a single cell repairing its DNA to an ecosystem recovering from a fire. The world is not just a collection of efficient machines, it is a network of resilient, self-healing systems. Now let's move to our second track of evidence, zooming out from individual patterns to the behavior of entire systems and the role of feedbacks. Consider the Earth's temperature. Over the last 4 billion years, the Sun has grown about 30% brighter. This is a massive increase in the amount of energy reaching our planet. Basic physics would suggest that the Earth should have heated up dramatically, boiling away the oceans and turning into a sterile hothouse. And yet, the geological record tells us that for the most part, the Earth's surface temperature has remained remarkably stable, staying within the narrow range required for liquid water and life. This is the faint young sun paradox, and it points to the existence of powerful, planet-scale regulatory systems. The Earth has acted like a planetary thermostat. How is this possible? The answer lies in feedback loops involving both living and non-living processes. One of the most important of these is the carbonate-silicate cycle. It works like this. Carbon dioxide in the atmosphere dissolves in rainwater, forming a weak carbonic acid. This acid falls on the land and chemically weathers silicate rocks. The resulting dissolved minerals wash into the oceans, where marine organisms use them to build their shells made of calcium carbonate. When these organisms die, their shells sink to the ocean floor, forming sediment. Over millions of years, this sediment is drawn down into the Earth's mantle by plate tectonics, where heat and pressure cook the carbon out of it. Finally, this carbon dioxide is released back into the atmosphere through volcanoes. Here's where the feedback comes in. The rate of that chemical weathering of rocks is sensitive to temperature. When the planet gets warmer, the weathering process speeds up, pulling more CO2 out of the atmosphere. Since CO2 is a greenhouse gas, this has a cooling effect, counteracting the initial warming. If the planet gets colder, weathering slows down. But the volcanoes continue to pump out CO2 at a relatively constant rate, so CO2 builds up in the atmosphere, warming the planet back up. This is a powerful negative feedback loop, a planetary thermostat that has operated over hundreds of millions of years. It's a beautiful example of the geological and chemical systems of the planet working together to maintain stability. There is no intention here, no foresight. It's simply a set of coupled chemical reactions that happen to have a stabilizing effect. It is a form of planetary evolution, an adaptation of the Earth system to the changing output of its star. A world without this kind of evolved, self-regulating feedback would have been at the mercy of the sun's growing brightness. It would have had no way to adjust its own thermostat, and its journey would have likely ended as a frozen snowball or a scorched desert long ago. The Earth is not a passive rock in space. It is an active, self-regulating system that has learned how to maintain its own habitability. The existence of these large-scale stabilizing feedback loops has profound second-order effects. It means that the system as a whole is more than the sum of its parts. You couldn't predict the Earth's long-term temperature stability just by looking at the properties of silicate rocks or the behavior of volcanoes or the biology of marine organisms in isolation. The stability is an emergent property of the entire interacting system. This tells us that when we try to understand a complex system, looking at the components one by one is not enough. We have to look at the connections, the feedbacks, the conversations happening between the parts. This principle of emergence is everywhere. Your consciousness is not located in a single neuron. It emerges from the complex interplay of billions of them. The intricate structure of a termite mound is not designed by a single termite architect. It emerges from millions of termites following very simple, local rules. In the same way, the habitability of our planet is not an accident of its initial conditions, but an emergent property of its long, co-evolutionary history. This also implies that the system has a certain degree of resilience, but also potential tipping points. A stabilizing feedback loop, like the carbonate-silicate cycle, can absorb a lot of disturbance. It can handle fluctuations in solar output, volcanic activity, and biological innovation. But if the disturbance is too large or too fast, it can overwhelm the feedback mechanism. Imagine pushing on a swinging pendulum. Small pushes are easily absorbed and the pendulum returns to its steady rhythm, but a very large, sudden push can send it swinging wildly or even break it. Similarly, planetary systems can be pushed past a threshold into a new stable state. The transition from an oxygen-poor to an oxygen-rich atmosphere was one such tipping point. The snowball Earth episodes, where the planet froze over almost completely, were another. These events show that the system's stability is not infinite. The negative feedbacks that maintain balance can, under certain conditions, be overtaken by positive feedbacks that drive rapid, runaway change. A world without these evolved feedbacks wouldn't just be unstable, it would be simplistic. It wouldn't have this rich history of different climate states, this dynamic dance between stability and radical transformation. The very concept of a tipping point would be meaningless in a world that couldn't evolve, because there would be no complex, self-regulating system to tip in the first place. As we pause here for a moment, resting between these large ideas, I want to invite you into a quiet, shared space. Wherever you are in the world, listening to this, you are part of a silent community of curious minds, all contemplating the same deep questions in the stillness of our own time zones. Perhaps for you it is late at night and the only light comes from the moon or a distant street lamp. Or maybe you are listening in the early hours of the morning as the sky begins to soften from black to blue. Just take a moment to sense that connection. A network of listeners, each in our own space, yet joined by this shared exploration. If you feel so inclined, and only if it feels right, you can let this journey be a small act of connection. A quiet like on a video or a subscription to a channel is not just a click. It is a simple, silent way of saying, I am here too. I am also wondering. It's a way to help these quiet explorations find their way to other minds who might be seeking a calm and curious space in the night. But there is no need to do anything at all. The most important thing is your own peace and your own rest. So just settle back, feel the support beneath you, and let your mind be ready to drift once more. Our journey continues, but the path is gentle and we will walk it together. To truly understand our central question, it's essential that we fairly and accurately represent the conventional explanation for the world we see. This is a principle known as steel manning, building the strongest possible version of an opposing argument rather than a weak straw man that is easy to knock down. The mainstream scientific view, which is supported by an enormous body of evidence from genetics, paleontology, geology, and more, is that the history of life and the planet is a product of two primary forces: contingency and natural selection. Let's unpack those. Contingency is another word for chance, for historical accident. The classic example is the asteroid impact that wiped out the dinosaurs 66 million years ago. If that asteroid had been on a slightly different trajectory, if it had arrived a few minutes earlier or later and plunged into the deep ocean instead of the shallow sea off the Yucatan Peninsula, the history of life on Earth would be radically different. The dinosaurs might have survived, and mammals, including our own ancestors, would have likely remained small, nocturnal creatures living in their shadow. There would be no humans. This view emphasizes the randomness and unpredictability of history. It suggests that if you were to rewind the tape of life and play it again, you would get a completely different outcome every time. The world we have is just one lucky roll of the cosmic dice. The second force is natural selection, the mechanism famously described by Charles Darwin. It's a simple yet powerful three-step process. First, there is variation within a population. Individuals are not identical clones, they have slightly different traits. Second, these traits are heritable. They can be passed down from parents to offspring. Third, there is differential survival and reproduction. In any given environment, some individuals, by virtue of their specific traits, will be slightly more successful at surviving and having offspring than others. Over many generations, this process leads to the population as a whole becoming better adapted to its environment. It's a blind, algorithmic process. There is no goal, no foresight, no intention. It's simply the logical consequence of imperfectly replicating entities competing for limited resources in a changing world. In this view, the intricate complexity of a cell, the elegance of a bird's wing, and the intelligence of the human brain are not the products of a guiding hand or an inherent drive towards complexity. They are the cumulative result of billions of years of this filtering process, acting on random mutations. The combination of contingency, the random events that shape the environment, and natural selection, the non-random process of adaptation to that environment, is seen as sufficient to explain the entire tapestry of life, from the first microbe to the present day. This model is incredibly powerful and has been validated by countless experiments and observations. It is the bedrock of modern biology. A world without evolution in this framework would be a world frozen at the very beginning, a sterile planet, or at best, a planet of simple, non-replicating chemical compounds, because the engine of selection and adaptation would never have been switched on. While the standard model of contingency and natural selection is incredibly powerful, it's not the only way to interpret the evidence. Alternative interpretations exist not necessarily to replace the mainstream view, but to complement it, suggesting that other forces might also be at play. These are not mutually exclusive ideas, but rather matters of emphasis. One such alternative perspective emphasizes the role of self-organization. This is the idea that order and complexity can arise spontaneously in systems without any external organizing force and without the filtering process of natural selection. Think of the way snowflakes form. There is no gene for snowflake shape. Instead, the intricate six-fold symmetry arises directly from the properties of water molecules and the physics of crystallization under specific atmospheric conditions. The pattern is inherent in the system itself. Proponents of this view suggest that many of the patterns we see in biology might be similarly self-organized. Perhaps the basic body plans of animals, for example, are not just the result of a long, meandering search by natural selection, but are constrained and guided by the laws of physics and developmental biology. The number of possible stable forms for a complex organism might be limited, just as the number of stable crystal structures is limited. In this view, if you rewound the tape of life, you might get very similar outcomes because the system would be drawn towards these inherently stable, self-organizing patterns. This is a view that emphasizes convergence over contingency. Another alternative interpretation focuses on the role of cooperation and symbiosis, rather than just competition. The traditional Darwinian narrative often highlights the struggle for existence. But as we look closer at the natural world, we see that cooperation is just as fundamental. The cells in your body are a testament to this. They are the descendants of once independent bacteria that, billions of years ago, formed a symbiotic partnership. The mitochondria that power your cells have their own DNA, a relic of their free-living past. Lichen, which can grow on bare rock, is a partnership between a fungus and an alga. Coral reefs are vast ecosystems built on a partnership between an animal, the coral polyp, and a photosynthetic microbe. This perspective suggests that the major leaps in evolutionary history have often been driven not by the victory of one group over another, but by the formation of new alliances, new levels of cooperation. It reframes evolution not just as a bloody battle, but as a process of negotiation and integration, of building new wholes from existing parts. These two alternative frames, self-organization and cooperation, do not invalidate natural selection. Instead, they enrich it. They suggest that the process of evolution is not just a random walk filtered by competition. It is a walk through a landscape shaped by the laws of physics and chemistry, where the most successful long-term strategy is often not to fight, but to join forces. The unknown here is the relative importance of each of these forces. Is the world we see primarily a product of chance, of necessity, or of cooperation? The answer is likely all three, in a complex and shifting balance. As we weigh these different interpretations, it's crucial to pause and consider how we know what we know. What are our tools for reading the deep past, and what are their limitations? Our understanding of Earth's history is built on incomplete evidence, pieced together like a detective solving a case with only a few scattered clues. One of our primary tools is the fossil record. Fossils are the mineralized remains of ancient life, and they provide a direct, tangible window into the past. However, the fossil record is notoriously incomplete. The process of fossilization is incredibly rare. An organism has to die in just the right place, like a swamp or a shallow sea, be buried quickly by sediment, and remain undisturbed for millions of years. The vast majority of organisms that have ever lived left no trace at all. Soft-bodied creatures like jellyfish or worms are especially underrepresented. This creates a significant bias in our view of the past. We are seeing only a tiny, skewed sample of the life that once existed. This is known as survivorship bias. We only see the evidence that has survived the immense filtering process of geological time. What we don't see, what has been erased, might tell a very different story. Another set of tools involves chemical and isotopic analysis. By studying the ratios of different isotopes, variants of an element, with different numbers of neutrons in ancient rocks, we can infer things about the past environment, like the temperature of the oceans or the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere. For example, living organisms have a slight preference for the lighter isotope of carbon, carbon-12. So, rocks that are rich in carbon-12 are often a sign that life was present, even if no fossils are found. These geochemical proxies are incredibly powerful, but they are also indirect. They are signals that need to be interpreted, and those interpretations rely on assumptions about how chemical processes worked billions of years ago. These assumptions are well tested, but they are not infallible. There is always a degree of uncertainty, a confidence band around our conclusions. We are like astronomers trying to understand a distant star by analyzing the light that reaches us. We can learn an immense amount, but we can never be completely certain that we have the full picture. So, as we continue our exploration, it's important to hold this methodological humility in mind. We are working with shadows and echoes. The story we tell is our best current reconstruction based on the available data, but it is not the final word. There are vast archives of information that have been lost forever, and new evidence is constantly emerging that forces us to revise our models. This uncertainty is not a weakness, it is the very essence of the scientific process. It keeps curiosity alive and reminds us that there is always more to learn. And with that humility, we can now reopen our main thread, looking at our world through these different lenses. The way we talk about things shapes the way we think about them. The language we use, especially when discussing complex processes like evolution, is not neutral. It is laden with metaphors and assumptions that can both illuminate and mislead. A common trap is the use of anthropomorphic language, attributing human-like intentions or agency to non-human systems. We say that nature selects certain traits that life wants to survive, or that a species designs a solution to an environmental problem. These are useful linguistic shortcuts, but if taken literally, they can create a distorted picture. Evolution has no foresight. A gene doesn't know that a particular mutation will be beneficial. A species isn't trying to become more complex. These processes are mindless and mechanistic. The appearance of purpose is an illusion, a product of our storytelling minds trying to make sense of a process that operates without a narrator. A more accurate, though perhaps less poetic, way to describe it is to say that certain variations happen to persist and replicate more successfully than others under a given set of conditions. That's all. One of the most powerful and potentially misleading metaphors we use is that of the evolutionary ladder, or the tree of life, with humans perched at the very top. This imagery reinforces the idea of a linear progression from lower to higher forms of life, a march of progress culminating in ourselves. But this is a profound misunderstanding of the evolutionary process. Evolution is not a ladder, it is a branching bush with no predetermined direction. A bacterium living today is just as evolved as a human being. It has a continuous line of ancestry stretching back billions of years, and it is exquisitely adapted to its own particular niche. In terms of survival, resilience, and sheer numbers, bacteria are arguably the most successful life form on this planet. To see them as primitive or less evolved is to impose our own value judgments onto the natural world. Every living organism is a masterpiece of survival, a contemporary success story. Tonight, let's try to consciously replace this anthropomorphic and progress-oriented language. When we talk about a system adapting, let's think of it as a change in its state in response to a perturbation. When we see what looks like a design, let's frame it as a stable configuration that has persisted over time. By being more precise with our language, we can strip away the layers of unintentional meaning and see the underlying mechanisms more clearly. This isn't about being pedantic, it's about refining our thinking and avoiding the cognitive traps that our own language can set for us. Let's make this more concrete by walking through a case template, applying our first evidence track, the idea of optimized emergent patterns. Imagine you are a single-celled organism living in the early ocean, billions of years ago. Your world is simple. Your primary challenge is to find food, dissolved nutrients in the water, and to avoid being eaten. You move through the water by chance, bumping into nutrient molecules. It's an inefficient process. Now imagine a random mutation slightly changes the way your cell membrane works. It makes it a little more sensitive to the chemical gradient of a particular nutrient. When you happen to move in the direction of a higher concentration of that nutrient, your propulsion system gets a tiny, almost imperceptible boost. When you move away from it, it slows down slightly. This is not a conscious decision. It is a simple chemical feedback loop. A stimulus, higher nutrient concentration, leads to a response, increased movement. Over time, your path through the water is no longer a pure random walk. It's a biased random walk, tending to meander towards areas richer in food. You are now slightly more efficient at finding nutrients than your competitors who lack this mutation. As a result, you get more energy, you are able to divide and replicate slightly more often, and you leave more offspring. Over many generations, this process repeats. Another random mutation might refine this chemical sensor, making it more sensitive. Another might improve the efficiency of your flagellum, your little swimming tail. Each small improvement that is passed on builds upon the last. There is no plan, no blueprint. Each step is just a tiny, local improvement. Now let's fast forward a few 100 million years. We see an organism that has a highly sophisticated chemosensory system. It can detect dozens of different chemicals in the water. It can not only move towards food, but actively flee from toxins. It has what we would call a behavior. But this complex behavior is simply the cumulative result of that initial, simple feedback loop, refined and layered over immense stretches of time. It is an emergent property. The organism has learned how to navigate its world. A world without evolution would be stuck at the first step, the pure random walk. There would be no mechanism for accumulating information about the environment, no way for successful strategies to be remembered and passed on. The world would be without memory, without learning. Every organism would be starting from scratch in every generation. The incredible diversity of behaviors we see in the natural world, the migration of birds, the dance of bees, the hunting strategies of wolves, are all extensions of this same fundamental process. A simple feedback loop, amplified and refined by selection over deep time. You are a product of that process. The very fact that you can seek out pleasure and avoid pain is a legacy of that first cell that learned to swim towards its dinner. Now let's apply our second evidence track, systems and feedbacks, to a case with a contrasting scale. Let's move from a single cell to the entire planet. Consider the Amazon rainforest. It is not just a collection of trees, it is a vast, self-regulating biogeochemical system. A single large tree in the Amazon can release hundreds of gallons of water vapor into the atmosphere every day through a process called transpiration. When you multiply this by the hundreds of billions of trees in the basin, you get a staggering amount of moisture being pumped into the sky. This creates what are known as flying rivers, vast plumes of atmospheric moisture that flow westwards across the continent, driven by the trade winds. This moisture is the source of much of the rainfall, not only in the Amazon itself, but also in the agricultural heartlands of South America, thousands of kilometers away. Here we see a powerful feedback loop. The forest generates its own rain. The rain allows the forest to thrive, and the thriving forest generates more rain. It is a self-perpetuating cycle. Now let's introduce a disturbance. Imagine a large-scale deforestation event in the eastern part of the Amazon. A large number of trees are removed. This reduces the amount of transpiration, which means less moisture is pumped into the flying river. This in turn leads to less rainfall in the western part of the forest. The reduced rainfall puts stress on the remaining trees, making them more vulnerable to drought and fire. If the stress is severe enough, more trees die, which further reduces transpiration, leading to even less rain. This is a positive feedback loop. The initial disturbance, deforestation, is amplified by the system's own dynamics, potentially pushing the entire ecosystem towards a tipping point. Scientists have modeled this process and suggest that if a certain percentage of the rainforest is lost, this feedback loop could become irreversible, causing a large-scale dieback of the forest and a transition to a drier, savanna-like ecosystem. This has nothing to do with Darwinian natural selection in the traditional sense. We are not talking about the evolution of individual organisms. We are talking about the stability and resilience of an entire biome. It's an example of system-level evolution. The Amazon as a system has evolved a stable, self-regulating state. But that stability is not guaranteed. It depends on the integrity of these complex feedback loops. A world without evolution, in this broader sense, would be a world without these intricate, self-sustaining ecosystems. You might have individual trees, but you wouldn't have a rainforest that makes its own weather. The planet would be a much simpler, less resilient, and less dynamic place. Let's expand our view even further to the scale of our planetary system and introduce our third track of evidence, the profound and often overlooked coupling between the Earth and its moon. Our moon is unusually large relative to its parent planet. This is likely the result of a cataclysmic impact early in Earth's history. While born of violence, this large moon has had a tremendously stabilizing effect on our world. One of the most significant effects is on the Earth's axial tilt, or obliquity. This is the angle between the Earth's rotational axis and its orbital plane, and it is the reason we have seasons. Currently, our tilt is about 23.5 degrees. The gravitational pull of our large moon acts like a steadying hand, preventing this tilt from wobbling wildly. Without the moon, the gravitational influence of the other planets, particularly Jupiter, would cause Earth's tilt to vary chaotically, swinging from nearly zero, no seasons, to as much as 85 degrees, extreme seasons, with the poles pointing almost directly at the sun. Such wild swings in axial tilt would lead to catastrophic climate change on timescales of millions of years. It would be virtually impossible for complex life, which requires a degree of environmental stability, to gain a foothold. The poles would alternate between being scorched and frozen, and the tropics would experience periods of extreme cold. The stable, predictable seasons that have allowed agriculture and civilization to flourish are, in large part, a gift from the moon. Another critical effect of the moon is on the tides. The moon's gravity pulls on the Earth's oceans, creating the daily rhythm of high and low tides. This constant mixing and churning of coastal waters had a huge impact on the early evolution of life. The intertidal zone, the area that is alternately submerged and exposed, is an incredibly dynamic and challenging environment. Organisms living there had to evolve ways to cope with both aquatic and terrestrial conditions, with changing salinity, temperature, and exposure to the air. Many scientists believe this challenging environment was a crucial crucible for evolutionary innovation, potentially driving the transition of life from the sea to the land. Furthermore, this tidal interaction is a two-way street. As the Earth rotates, the tidal bulge in the oceans is dragged slightly ahead of the Moon. This bulge exerts a tiny gravitational pull on the Moon, causing it to gradually move further away from the Earth at a rate of about 3.8 centimeters per year. At the same time, the friction between the oceans and the seafloor caused by the tides is slowly breaking the Earth's rotation. This is called tidal friction. Billions of years ago, a day on Earth was much shorter, perhaps only 6 hours long, and the Moon was much closer. The immense, slow process of tidal damping has lengthened our day, stabilized our climate, and shaped the course of life. This Earth-Moon system is another example of a co-evolutionary partnership, a slow dance that has been unfolding for billions of years. A world without this large moon would be a fundamentally different place, a dizzyingly fast-spinning planet with a chaotic, unpredictable climate. The consequences of this planetary coupling are written into the very fabric of our world's history. The stability of our axial tilt provided by the moon has created a framework of climatic predictability over geological timescales. This doesn't mean the climate has been static, we've had ice ages and hothouse periods, but it has fluctuated within a relatively bounded range. This long-term stability is a prerequisite for the slow, cumulative process of biological evolution. Complex organisms take a long time to evolve. They require environments that are persistent enough for the incremental process of natural selection to work its magic. A world of constant climatic chaos would be a world of perpetual starting over, where any progress towards complexity would be wiped out by the next wild swing in temperature. The Moon, in a very real sense, has given Earth the gift of time. It has created a calm harbor in the turbulent cosmic sea, a space where the slow, patient work of evolution could unfold. The lengthening of the day also has profound implications. A planet with a 6-hour day would have a very different atmosphere and climate. The faster rotation would create much stronger Coriolis forces, leading to more extreme wind speeds and weather patterns, perpetual superhurricanes. The short day-night cycle would mean less time for surfaces to heat up during the day and cool down at night, resulting in smaller daily temperature swings but a more violently churning atmosphere. The very rhythm of life, the cycle of photosynthesis and respiration, the patterns of sleep and wakefulness, are all tuned to the 24-hour day we now have. This rhythm is not an arbitrary number, it is a legacy of 4.5 billion years of tidal friction. So when we think about what a world without evolution would look like, we must consider this planetary scale. A world without its large moon would be a world that lacked the fundamental stability for its own systems to evolve complexity. It would be a world trapped in a state of primitive chaos. The quiet, predictable passage of the seasons, the gentle rhythm of the tides, the very length of our day, these are not just background settings. They are the products of an evolved planetary partnership, a testament to the fact that evolution happens not just to creatures, but to entire worlds. Let's now turn to our fourth track of evidence, the way the Earth keeps a diary. The planet has a memory stored in archives of rock, ice, and sediment. These records allow us to read the deep past and understand the long-term patterns of change. Think of the layers of sedimentary rock you might see in a cliff face or a road cutting. Each layer is a snapshot of a particular time, a page in the Earth's history book. A layer of sandstone might tell of an ancient desert. A layer of shale might speak of a quiet, deep sea floor. A coal seam is the compressed ghost of a vast, swampy forest that lived and died millions of years ago. By studying these layers, a field called stratigraphy, geologists can reconstruct the changing environments of the past. Within these layers, fossils provide the chapter markers telling us which organisms were alive at the time that sediment was laid down. The deeper we dig, the further back in time we go. This geological column is one of the most powerful pieces of evidence for evolution. It shows a clear and consistent pattern. Simple life forms appear in the oldest rocks, and more complex forms appear in progressively younger rocks. We never find a rabbit fossil in Precambrian rock. The story told by the rocks is one of succession, of gradual change over immense timescales. Another powerful archive is found in the ice caps of Greenland and Antarctica. Each year, a new layer of snow falls, burying and compressing the layers from previous years. Over hundreds of thousands of years, this creates a continuous record of the climate. By drilling deep into the ice and extracting ice cores, scientists can read this record like a book. Tiny bubbles of air trapped in the ice are samples of the ancient atmosphere, allowing us to directly measure the concentration of greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane in the past. The isotopic composition of the water molecules in the ice tells us the temperature at the time the snow fell. These ice cores give us an incredibly detailed year-by-year account of the Earth's climate going back almost 1 million years. They reveal the rhythmic dance of the ice ages, the natural cycles of warming and cooling driven by subtle changes in the Earth's orbit. These natural archives are lagging indicators. They are a record of what has already happened. They don't tell us about the future, but they provide the essential context for understanding the present. They are our baseline, our measure of the planet's natural variability. A world without evolution would be a world without this rich and detailed history. The rock layers would be monotonous, the ice cores would show a flat line. There would be no story to tell. The planet's memory would be a blank page. The existence of these deep time archives places important constraints on our understanding. They provide the ground truth against which we must test our models and hypotheses. For example, if a climate model predicts a certain temperature for a past period, we can check that prediction against the data from ice cores or other paleoclimate proxies. If the model doesn't match the data, then the model is wrong, or at least incomplete. This is a crucial part of the scientific process, the constant dialogue between theory and observation. The archives tell us what happened, and the models try to explain why. What these archives reveal, overwhelmingly, is a world of dynamic, unceasing change. They show us that climate has always been in flux, that sea levels have risen and fallen, that continents have moved, and that life has constantly adapted to these changing conditions. They provide no evidence for a static, unchanging world. The very existence of this layered, complex record is a testament to the evolutionary nature of our planet. However, these archives also highlight what we can't know. As we discussed earlier, the record is incomplete. There are huge gaps in the geological record, periods of time from which no rocks have survived. This is like trying to read a book with most of the pages torn out. We can piece together the main plot, but many of the details are lost forever. We also have a resolution problem. As we go further back in time, our ability to resolve events becomes fuzzier. We might be able to say that an event happened within a certain million-year window, but we can't pin it down to a specific century or year. This means we have to be very careful about making claims about the speed of past events. What might look like a sudden, instantaneous event in the rock record could have actually unfolded over tens of thousands of years, an eternity for us, but the blink of an eye in geological time. So, while the archives give us the broad strokes of the story, they also enforce a certain humility. They remind us that our knowledge is partial and provisional. We are reading a damaged manuscript, and we must be content with an imperfect translation. As we continue to assemble these different tracks of evidence, from the small-scale patterns of life to the large-scale feedbacks of the planet, to the deep archives of its history, we begin to see the outlines of a more integrated picture. We are starting to build a case that evolution is not just one process among many, but a fundamental property of complex information-storing systems. whether they are biological, geological, or planetary in scale. Before we attempt to synthesize these ideas, we will explore a few more crucial pieces of the puzzle. We need to look at the living systems themselves, the biomes, and how they engage in a constant conversation with the non-living world of the atmosphere and oceans. We will also explore the nature of the code that life uses to store and transmit its learned wisdom through time. We will pick up these threads shortly. For now, just let the idea settle that the story of our world is one of memory, of information being recorded, stored, and built upon layer by patient layer over billions of years. The world has been learning for a very long time. Let's dive into our fifth track of evidence, the intricate conversations that happen between the living world, the biome, and the atmosphere. These are not one-way monologues, they are dynamic, two-way exchanges that shape the entire planet. We've already touched upon this with the example of the Amazon rainforest generating its own rain. Let's explore another, even more fundamental example, the relationship between forests and clouds. Trees, through transpiration, release water vapor, but they also release microscopic particles into the air, things like pollen, fungal spores, and volatile organic compounds, the chemicals that give a pine forest its distinctive smell. These tiny airborne particles, called aerosols, act as seeds for the formation of clouds. Water vapor in the atmosphere needs a surface to condense onto in order to form a droplet. Without these aerosols, the air could be saturated with water vapor, but no clouds would form. By releasing these particles, forests actively encourage cloud formation above them. The clouds, in turn, have two major effects. First, their white tops reflect sunlight back into space, which has a cooling effect on the local area. Second, they produce rain, which the forest needs to survive. So we have another elegant feedback loop. The forest releases particles that create clouds, and the clouds provide the rain and shade that the forest needs to thrive. The biome is engineering its own climate. This is not a conscious or intentional process. A tree is not trying to make it rain. It's simply that over evolutionary time, trees that happened to release particles that favored cloud formation had a slight survival advantage. They lived in a slightly cooler, wetter environment, which allowed them to grow better and produce more offspring. Over millions of years, this has resulted in entire ecosystems that are finely tuned to interact with the atmosphere in a way that stabilizes their own local climate. This concept challenges the old view of life as a passive passenger on Earth, simply adapting to whatever climate the planet's physics and chemistry happened to provide. Instead, it suggests that life is an active player, a collaborator in the creation of its own environment. This idea, known as the Gaia hypothesis in its strongest form, proposes that the Earth's systems behave as a single, self-regulating superorganism. While that framing can be controversial for its teleological overtones, the underlying scientific evidence for powerful biogeochemical feedbacks is robust. Life is not just a passenger, it's part of the ship's crew, constantly adjusting the sails and rigging to keep the vessel on a steady course. A world without this co-evolution between life and atmosphere would be a world with a much more chaotic and less hospitable climate. The climate would be solely dictated by raw physics and chemistry, without the subtle, stabilizing influence of the biosphere. The existence of these powerful biome-atmosphere loops reveals a great deal about resilience, thresholds, and failure modes. A resilient system is one that can absorb disturbances and still maintain its basic function and structure. The feedback loops we've been discussing are the primary source of this resilience. For example, if a small part of a forest is cleared, the rest of the forest continues to generate clouds and rain, which helps the cleared area to regrow. The system has a capacity for self-repair. However, this resilience is not infinite. As we saw with the Amazon example, if the disturbance is too large, it can push the system across a tipping point. The stabilizing negative feedback loop, forest makes rain, rain helps forest, can be overwhelmed and replaced by a destabilizing positive feedback loop. Less forest means less rain, which means even less forest. When a system crosses a tipping point, it can rapidly shift to a new, alternative stable state. The transition from a lush rainforest to a dry savanna is one such shift. This new state is also stable, but it's often less complex, less productive, and less hospitable to the life that existed before. Understanding these failure modes is critical. It shows that the health of an ecosystem is not a simple linear function. You can lose 10% of a forest, then 20%, then 30%, and things might seem relatively okay. But then you lose that crucial 31st%, and the entire system can unravel with surprising speed. This non-linear behavior is a hallmark of complex systems. It means that the world is not always predictable, and that small actions can sometimes have very large, unforeseen consequences. A world without evolved biome-atmosphere feedbacks would be a simpler, more linear world, but it would also be a far more brittle one. It would lack the deep, evolved resilience that allows ecosystems to persist for millions of years, but it would also lack the terrifying potential for sudden, catastrophic collapse when that resilience is pushed too far. Our current world has both a remarkable capacity for self-regulation and a vulnerability to being pushed past its limits. It is a world that demands a certain degree of wisdom and restraint from any species that develops the power to alter it on a global scale. Let's now turn to our sixth evidence track, using an analogy that is both powerful and needs to be handled with care. The idea of biology as code. Think of the DNA molecule. It is, in essence, a digital information storage system. It uses an alphabet of 4 letters, A, C, G, and T, to write the instruction manual for building and operating a living organism. The entire human genome, the complete set of instructions for building a person, contains about 3 billion of these letters. But this is an immense amount of information, all packed into the microscopic nucleus of a single cell. This genetic code is passed down from one generation to the next, a legacy of information that has been accumulating and being edited for nearly 4 billion years. When an organism reproduces, it makes a copy of its DNA. This copying process is incredibly accurate, but it's not perfect. Occasionally, errors, mutations, creep in. These are like typos in the code. Most of these typos are harmless or even damaging, but very rarely a typo will result in a slight improvement, a new feature that works a little better in the current environment. Natural selection then acts as the quality control or the code reviewer. The bugs that cause the program to crash are eliminated. The patches and upgrades that improve performance are preserved and passed on. This analogy of DNA as an operating system that has been debugged and upgraded over billions of years can be a useful way to think about evolution. It helps us understand how incredible complexity can arise from a simple, iterative process. The first life on Earth had a very simple operating system, perhaps just a few lines of code. Over time, new subroutines were added, new modules were integrated, like when mitochondria were incorporated into the cell, and the code base grew. The result is the vast and complex suite of software that runs life on Earth today. This framework also helps us understand the concept of shared ancestry. The fact that you share about 50% of your genes with a banana is not a coincidence. It's because both you and the banana inherited parts of your operating system from a common ancestor that lived over 1 billion years ago. We are all running different versions of the same ancient code. However, we must be explicit about the caveats of this analogy. Unlike human-written code, there is no programmer, no intelligent designer. The code writes itself through a blind process of mutation and selection, and unlike a clean, well-documented operating system, biological code is often messy, full of redundant parts, vestigial subroutines from previous versions, and illogical workarounds. It's a patchwork quilt, not an elegant blueprint, but for all its messiness, it works. The biology as code analogy gives us a powerful frame for understanding resilience and robustness, rather than perfection. A well-designed computer operating system is often built to be robust. If one small program crashes, it doesn't bring down the entire system. There are error-checking protocols and backup systems in place. The system is designed to fail gracefully. Biological systems have evolved similar properties. Your body has multiple, redundant pathways for crucial functions. You have 2 kidneys, 2 lungs. Your immune system has several different lines of defense. If one part of the system is damaged or fails, others can often compensate. This is not because of some intelligent design, but because, over evolutionary time, organisms with this kind of built-in redundancy were more likely to survive unexpected challenges and pass on their genes. The system is not perfect, but it is resilient. It's good enough to persist in a dangerous and unpredictable world. This perspective helps us move away from the idea of evolution producing perfectly optimized machines. An engineer designing a machine might aim for maximum efficiency and performance under a specific set of conditions. Evolution, on the other hand, seems to favor robustness and adaptability across a wide range of conditions. It's a different kind of optimization problem. It's not about being the best in one specific scenario. It's about being good enough to survive in many different scenarios. This explains the apparent messiness of biology. The extra, seemingly redundant bits of DNA, the strange and inefficient developmental pathways, these might not make sense from a clean engineering perspective, but they might represent a kind of strategic reserve, a library of old code that could potentially be reactivated or repurposed if the environment changes. A world without evolution would lack this deep, messy, evolved resilience. Systems would be brittle. A single point of failure could lead to total collapse. The world we inhabit is not a perfect, crystalline structure. It is a gnarled, ancient, and incredibly tough tree that has weathered billions of years of storms. Its strength lies not in its perfection, but in its accumulated history of surviving and adapting to failure. For our 7th evidence track, let's journey back in deep time to a world that would be almost unrecognizable to us. Let's reconstruct the supercontinent of Pangea. Imagine standing on a shoreline about 250 million years ago. The air is thick and has more oxygen than today, making fires burn hotter and faster. The sun feels strangely intense because the ozone layer is not as developed. The plants are alien, no flowers, no grasses, just strange, giant ferns and towering club mosses. In the distance you might see bizarre-looking reptiles and early mammal-like creatures, but the most profound difference is the geography. All of the Earth's major land masses are fused together into one enormous continent, Pangea, which stretches from pole to pole. The rest of the planet is a single, gigantic ocean called Panthalassa. There is no Atlantic Ocean. North America, Europe, Africa, and South America are all locked together. This is not a speculative fantasy. The evidence for Pangea is written in the rocks. We find matching geological formations and identical fossils on continents that are now separated by thousands of miles of ocean. The fit between the coastlines of South America and Africa is not a coincidence. It's a scar from their ancient separation. Living on a supercontinent like Pangea would have been a very different experience. The sheer size of the landmass would have created a climate of incredible extremes. The coastal regions might have been subject to colossal monsoons, while the vast interior of the continent, thousands of miles from any source of moisture, would have been an immense, arid desert, far larger and drier than anything on Earth today. The daily and seasonal temperature swings would have been brutal. This single landmass also meant that life was more homogeneous. Animals and plants could, in theory, spread across the entire continent, leading to less biodiversity than in a world with many separate landmasses where life can evolve in isolation. The breakup of Pangea, which began around 200 million years ago, was one of the most significant events in the history of our planet. As the continents drifted apart, new oceans formed, like the Atlantic. This created new coastlines, changed ocean currents, and dramatically altered the global climate, making it generally milder and wetter. It also isolated populations of organisms on the newly separated continents, creating countless new laboratories for evolution to experiment in. The unique wildlife of Australia, for example, is a direct result of its long isolation. This dance of the continents, driven by the slow, inexorable heat engine of the Earth's mantle, is a primary driver of long-term environmental change. It is the stage on which the drama of biological evolution has played out. The existence of supercontinents like Pangea and its predecessor Hadean has dramatic implications for the planet's climate and the evolution of life. The primary consequence of having one massive landmass is the effect on moisture transport. Oceans are the source of the water vapor that becomes rain. In a world with a supercontinent, the interior regions are simply too far from the ocean for moisture to reach them. This leads to the formation of vast, hyper-arid deserts where life as we know it would struggle to survive. These harsh interior climates would act as a major barrier to the spread of many species and would severely limit the total amount of life the planet could support. The breakup of a supercontinent is therefore a major catalyst for global change. As new, smaller continents form, they have a much higher ratio of coastline to land area. This allows maritime air and moisture to penetrate much further inland, leading to a global climate that is, on average, more humid and temperate. This, in turn, allows for the expansion of forests and other ecosystems, increasing the planet's overall biomass and biodiversity. Ocean currents are also profoundly affected by continental configuration. With one giant ocean, Panthalassa, the global ocean circulation would have been much simpler and likely more sluggish than it is today. The opening and closing of oceanic gateways as the continents move, like the Drake Passage between South America and Antarctica, or the Isthmus of Panama connecting North and South America, have had huge impacts on how heat is transported around the globe. The formation of the Antarctic circumpolar current, for example, which was enabled by the separation of Antarctica from Australia and South America, isolated the southern continent, allowing its massive ice sheet to form, which in turn had a dramatic cooling effect on the entire planet. This illustrates the deep and intricate connection between the hardware of plate tectonics and the software of the climate system and biological evolution. You cannot change one without fundamentally altering the others. A world without an evolving geology, a world without plate tectonics and continental drift, would be a static world. It would likely have remained a water world with a few scattered volcanoes or a single, permanent supercontinent with a harsh, stable climate. The dynamic, ever-changing geography of our planet has been a constant source of new challenges and new opportunities, a relentless engine driving the diversification and evolution of life. Now let's step into the skeptic's corner. To maintain our commitment to generous skepticism, we must confront the strongest criticisms and potential falsifiers of the broader, more systemic view of evolution we've been exploring. The most powerful counterargument comes from a strict adherence to the modern synthesis of evolutionary biology, which we discussed earlier. This view would argue that while all these planetary systems, the moon's stabilization, the carbonate-silicate cycle, continental drift, are fascinating and important, they are simply the stage. They are the background conditions, the changing environment to which life adapts via the established mechanisms of random mutation and natural selection. In this view, attributing any kind of learning or self-regulation to the planet as a whole is a step too far. It's an unnecessary mystification of what are ultimately just complex but mindless physical and chemical processes. The Earth doesn't maintain its habitability, it just so happens that the physical parameters have by sheer luck remained within the range that life can tolerate. This is an argument from the anthropic principle. Of course, we find ourselves on a planet that is stable and habitable because if it weren't, we wouldn't be here to observe it. There may be countless planets that weren't so lucky, that spiraled into a runaway greenhouse or a deep freeze, and we simply don't see them. We are just the winners of a cosmic lottery. What could falsify the more integrated systemic view? One potential falsifier would be the discovery of a planet that is teeming with complex life but lacks many of the stabilizing features we've discussed. If we found an exoplanet with a vibrant biosphere that has no large moon, no plate tectonics, and no evidence of long-term climate regulation, it would suggest that these things are not, in fact, necessary prerequisites for complex, evolving life. It would support the idea that life is more opportunistic and can arise in a much wider range of conditions than this systemic model implies. Another potential falsifier could come from within our own planet's history. If further geological evidence revealed that the Earth's climate has actually been far more chaotic and unstable than our current reading of the proxies suggests, it would weaken the case for long-term self-regulation. If the periods of stability were shown to be the exception rather than the rule, the idea of a planetary thermostat would seem less plausible. A third line of criticism focuses on the danger of teleology and metaphor. Critics would argue that using terms like learning, memory, or conversation to describe planetary processes is scientifically sloppy and invites misunderstanding. It's imposing a biological, even cognitive, framework onto systems that are purely geochemical and physical. The planet is not an organism, it is a machine, a very complex one, but a machine nonetheless. We must concede that this is a powerful and coherent critique. It forces us to be rigorous, to distinguish between metaphor and mechanism, and to acknowledge the profound role that pure chance has played in our history. The truth likely lies in a synthesis, a world governed by chance and necessity, where the blind algorithm of natural selection operates on a planetary stage that is itself an active, dynamic, and evolving system. Let's take a brief interlude to reflect on our own method of thinking, adopting the mindset of a detective faced with a complex, multi-layered case. The evidence we have about the deep past is like a series of transparent overlays. One layer is the fossil record, another is the geochemical data from rocks, a third is the information from ice cores, and a fourth is the model of plate tectonics. No single layer tells the whole story. Our task is to stack these layers on top of each other and look for patterns of correspondence, for places where the stories align and reinforce one another. But we also have to be intensely aware of what is missing. There are holes in each layer, and there are entire layers that have been lost to time. This means we have to be comfortable with ambiguity and uncertainty. A good detective doesn't jump to the first conclusion that fits some of the evidence. They hold multiple hypotheses in their mind at once, constantly weighing them against new information. We also have to be aware of our own cognitive biases. One of the most powerful is confirmation bias, the tendency to favor information that confirms our existing beliefs. If we believe that the Earth is a self-regulating system, we will tend to notice and emphasize the evidence that supports that view, while downplaying the evidence that contradicts it. To counteract this, we must actively seek out disconfirming evidence. We must ask ourselves, what would I expect to see if my hypothesis were wrong? This is the essence of the scientific mindset. It's not about proving ourselves right. It's about rigorously trying to prove ourselves wrong and only accepting a hypothesis when it has survived our best attempts to falsify it. Another bias is what we might call narrative bias. The human mind loves a good story. We are drawn to explanations that have a clear cause and effect structure, a satisfying narrative arc. The story of a living planet that actively maintains its own health is a compelling one, but we must be careful not to fall in love with the story at the expense of the data. The universe is under no obligation to be narratively satisfying. Sometimes the explanation really is just, it was a random accident. So, as we proceed towards a synthesis, let's keep this detective's mindset. Let's hold our conclusions lightly, acknowledge the gaps in our knowledge, and remain open to the possibility that the truth is stranger and more complex than any single story we can tell. With this renewed commitment to methodological rigor, we can now reopen our main thread. After journeying through deep time, vast planetary systems, and complex scientific models, let's bring our attention back to the human scale, back to this room, back to your own body. Feel the gentle rise and fall of your chest with each breath. This simple, rhythmic motion connects you directly to the grand planetary cycles we've been discussing. The oxygen you are inhaling was produced by plants and plankton, a gift from the biosphere. The carbon dioxide you are exhaling will become part of the atmosphere, a tiny contribution to the planet's energy budget. You are a participant in the Earth's metabolism. You are not separate from it. This is not a poetic sentiment, it is a literal physical fact. The atoms that make up your body were forged in stars, cycled through rocks and oceans and atmospheres, and assembled into you by the machinery of life. You are a temporary arrangement of Earth's stuff. This realization can be a source of profound belonging. The feeling of being a small, isolated self can dissolve into a larger sense of being part of an ancient, ongoing process. This grounded awareness gives us a different kind of agency. The problems of the world can often feel overwhelming, the scale so vast that our individual actions seem meaningless. But when we see ourselves as nodes in a complex network, as participants in a system, our perspective can shift. We don't have to solve everything at once. We can focus on our own small part of the system, on the flows and relationships that we can directly influence. We can tend to the health of our own bodies, the quality of our relationships, the well-being of our local communities and ecosystems. These are not small or trivial things. A complex system is built from the bottom up. The health of the whole is dependent on the health of its constituent parts. By cultivating health and resilience at the human scale, we contribute to the health and resilience of the larger systems we are part of. This is not a prescription for action, but an invitation to a different way of seeing. It's a way of finding meaning, not in grand, heroic gestures, but in the quiet, consistent practice of care, attention, and mindful participation. Your breath, your body, your immediate surroundings, this is your anchor point in the vast, evolving story of the cosmos. Let's now introduce our eighth and final track of evidence, which deals with the fundamental currency of all change, energy. Everything that happens in the universe, from the shining of a star to the firing of a neuron in your brain, involves the flow and transformation of energy. The Earth system is defined by its energy budget. The primary input is solar radiation from the sun. The primary output is infrared radiation, heat, radiated back out into space. For the planet's temperature to be stable over the long term, the incoming energy and the outgoing energy must be in balance. Any change to this balance will cause the planet to either warm up or cool down until a new equilibrium is reached. Greenhouse gases, for example, work by trapping some of the outgoing infrared radiation, effectively reducing the energy output and warming the planet. Clouds, as we've discussed, can have both a cooling effect by reflecting sunlight and a warming effect by trapping heat, and their net impact is one of the biggest uncertainties in climate science. This energy budget is the hard constraint, the fundamental law of physics within which all of the Earth's systems must operate. Biological systems are also governed by the laws of energy. Life is, in essence, a process of capturing, storing, and utilizing energy to create and maintain order in a universe that tends towards disorder. Entropy. The foundation of almost all life on Earth is photosynthesis, the process by which plants and other organisms capture the energy from sunlight and store it in the chemical bonds of sugar molecules. This captured energy then flows through the entire food web. An herbivore eats the plant, a carnivore eats the herbivore, and decomposers break down the dead organic matter, releasing the nutrients back into the system. At each step in this chain, a significant amount of energy is lost as heat, according to the second law of thermodynamics. This means that there is an energy pyramid with a large base of primary producers, plants, and progressively smaller tiers of consumers. The total amount of life that the planet can support, its total biomass, is ultimately limited by the efficiency of this energy capture and transfer process. Evolution from this perspective can be seen as a long process of discovering new and more efficient ways to find, capture, and utilize energy. The evolution of oxygen-breathing metabolism, for example, was a huge leap forward because it allows organisms to extract far more energy from a glucose molecule than anaerobic, non-oxygen metabolism. The constraints imposed by energy flows shape everything from the size and shape of an animal to the structure of an entire ecosystem. The implications of this energy-centric view are far-reaching. It provides a common language, the language of physics, to describe both biological and geological systems. It allows us to see that the evolution of a star, the circulation of the oceans, and the evolution of a species are all, at their core, stories about the flow and transformation of energy. This perspective also helps us understand the second-order trade-offs and sensitivities in the system. For instance, any evolutionary innovation that requires a large amount of energy must provide a correspondingly large survival advantage to be successful. A large brain, like ours, is an incredibly energy-intensive organ. It consumes about 20% of our body's energy while representing only 2% of its mass. For such an expensive organ to have evolved, the benefits it provided in terms of problem-solving, social cooperation, and tool use must have been immense. This highlights the fact that there is no free lunch in evolution. Every adaptation comes with a cost, an energy expenditure. This framework also reveals multiple plausible mechanisms for past events, reminding us to maintain our uncertainty. Consider a mass extinction event. Was it caused by an asteroid impact that blocked out the sun, leading to a collapse of the photosynthetic base of the food web, an energy crisis? Or was it caused by massive volcanic eruptions that released huge amounts of CO2, leading to rapid global warming and ocean acidification, a climate crisis? Or was it a combination of factors? The energy budget perspective doesn't give us the final answer, but it gives us a powerful tool for framing the questions and evaluating the evidence. It forces us to ask, where did the energy come from? Where did it go, and how did its flow change? A world without evolution would be a world in a state of simple energy equilibrium. There would be no complex structures, no life, no ecosystems, no hurricanes that are built and maintained by the flow of energy. It would be a world of thermodynamic boredom, a planet where nothing interesting ever happens. It's worth pausing to consider how other ways of knowing, outside of modern science, have grappled with these same patterns of change, stability, and interconnectedness. Many older narratives and mythologies from cultures all over the world contain deep insights into the nature of complex systems framed in their own symbolic language. These stories are not scientific theories, but they often encode generations of careful observation of the natural world. Many creation myths, for example, don't describe a single, instantaneous act of creation, but a gradual process of emergence, of order arising from chaos, of separation and differentiation. The world is often born from the interplay of opposing forces, light and dark, earth and sky, order and chaos, reflecting an intuitive understanding of the dynamic tension that holds complex systems together. The concept of a world tree or axis mundi, found in many different cultures, can be seen as a powerful metaphor for the interconnectedness of all things, with its roots deep in the earth, its trunk in the world of the living, and its branches reaching to the heavens. It's a systemic view of the cosmos, a recognition that all parts are connected to the whole. Many indigenous traditions hold a deep-seated understanding of feedback loops and ecological relationships, born from millennia of intimate, lived experience with their local environments. The idea of reciprocity, that you must give back to the world what you take from it, is a practical application of the principle of closing the loop, of maintaining the balance of the system. Stories about trickster figures like Coyote or Loki often serve as cautionary tales about the dangers of disrupting the natural order, of acting with hubris and forgetting one's place within the larger web of life. These narratives mapped similar patterns to the ones we've discussed tonight: the cyclical nature of time, the coevolution of humans and their environment, the importance of balance and resilience. To bridge these ways of knowing with the scientific models we've been exploring is not to say that they are the same thing. They use different languages, different methods, and have different purposes, but it is to acknowledge that the human mind has been wrestling with these fundamental questions for a very long time. It can cultivate a sense of humility, a recognition that our modern scientific framework is just one of the latest tools we have developed to try and make sense of an ancient and profoundly complex world. As we draw our various threads of evidence together, the emergent patterns, the planetary feedbacks, the deep time archives, the biome-atmosphere conversations, the code of life, the dance of continents, and the flow of energy, we are approaching a pivotal moment in our journey. We have seen how evolution is not just a biological story, but a planetary one. We have explored the tension between chance and necessity, between competition and cooperation. We have steel-manned the conventional view and considered its alternatives. We are now poised to make a turn, to reframe the entire question. Up to this point, we have been operating within a binary, a world with evolution versus a world without it. But what if this is a false dichotomy? What if the real insight lies not in choosing between two opposite poles, but in seeing them as part of a larger continuum? Soon we will widen our model, moving beyond a simple on-off switch for evolution and towards a more nuanced understanding of the different modes and tempos of change. The turn in our thinking is this: we must move from seeing the world in binaries to seeing it in continua. The question is not evolution, yes or no. The more interesting question is what kind, how fast, and at what scale. We have explored stabilizing negative feedback loops that keep systems in a state of relative stasis for long periods. This is a kind of evolution, but it's an evolution that favors stability and persistence. We have also explored amplifying positive feedback loops that can drive rapid, radical change, pushing a system across a tipping point into a new state. This is also evolution, but it is a revolutionary, transformative kind of evolution. A planet without evolution would not be a static rock. Such a thing is impossible in a dynamic universe. A planet without evolution would be a planet stuck in only one mode, the mode of simple, linear cause and effect, dictated by raw physics. It would be a world that gets hotter as the sun gets brighter, with no capacity to regulate itself. It would be a world where change is purely destructive, an accumulation of damage and decay, with no mechanism for repair, novelty, or renewal. The evolution we see on Earth is a far richer process. It encompasses both long periods of quiet stability, stasis, and brief, revolutionary bursts of change, punctuation. This reframing allows us to move beyond the false choice between a world of pure chance and a world of deep, meaningful order. It allows for both. There are periods when the system is highly constrained, when it is locked into a stable state and change is difficult. During these times, the valleys in the landscape we spoke of earlier are deep, and the system tends to stay put. But there are also times when the system is in a more fragile, chaotic state, perhaps after a major disturbance like a mass extinction. During these times, the landscape is flatter and small. Contingent events can have huge, unpredictable consequences, sending the system down a completely new path. The history of our planet seems to be a dance between these two modes. Think of it in terms of your own life. There are long periods of routine and stability where your habits and behaviors are locked in. But there are also moments of crisis or opportunity, a new job, a new relationship, a personal loss, that can act as tipping points, fundamentally reconfiguring your life's trajectory. Your own life is not a simple choice between stasis and chaos. It is a dynamic interplay between the two. Widening our model in this way allows us to hold both the predictability and the unpredictability of the world in a single, more comprehensive frame. It acknowledges the power of chance while also recognizing the deep, structural patterns that guide and constrain the flow of change. Now let's attempt our first pass at a synthesis, integrating our various evidence tracks into a minimal, coherent model. At the heart of this model is the idea of information. A system can be said to evolve if it has a mechanism for storing information, a mechanism for generating variations in that information, and a mechanism for selecting which variations persist. Let's see how this applies at different scales. At the biological scale, the information storage medium is DNA. The mechanism for variation is mutation and genetic recombination. The selection mechanism is natural selection, differential survival, and reproduction. This is the classic Darwinian model, and it is the engine of biological adaptation. But we can apply the same logic to other scales. At the ecosystem scale, the information is stored in the structure of the ecosystem itself, the specific collection of species, their relationships, and the nutrient cycles that connect them. Variation can be introduced by new species arriving or by environmental changes. Selection acts on the entire system. Ecosystems that are more resilient and stable in the face of disturbances are more likely to persist through time. The Amazon rainforest is a piece of stored information, a successful configuration that has been selected for its ability to create a stable, self-perpetuating climate. Let's zoom out further to the planetary scale. The information is stored in the physical and chemical state of the planet, the composition of the atmosphere, the configuration of the continents, the circulation of the oceans. Variation is introduced by things like continental drift, changes in solar output, and asteroid impacts. Selection, in this context, is about the persistence of habitability. Over billions of years, the Earth system has explored different states. Some of those states were unstable and short-lived, but the system has tended to settle into states, like our current one, that are stabilized by powerful negative feedback loops like the carbonate-silicate cycle. This stable, habitable state is a form of stored information, a memory of what works. In this view, our initial question, what if we never evolved, becomes, what if the universe had no mechanism for storing and building upon information? The answer is a universe of pure chaos and noise. It would be a universe of flickering transient phenomena with no memory, no history, and no possibility of accumulating complexity. The fact that we exist, that we live on a complex, stable planet, and that we can even contemplate these questions, is a testament to the power of these nested, evolutionary processes that can capture and build upon information over immense stretches of time, from the scale of a single gene to the scale of an entire world. As we refine our synthesis, it's crucial to reconcile the counterpoints and explicitly acknowledge what remains unknown. Our integrated model, which sees evolution as a nested, multi-scale process of information storage and selection, is powerful, but it must accommodate the profound role of contingency and chance. The asteroid that killed the dinosaurs was not part of a self-regulating feedback loop. It was a random event from outside the system that reset the rules of the game. Our model must have room for these unpredictable external shocks. It cannot be a purely deterministic model where everything is an inevitable outcome of self-organizing principles. The story of our planet is a dialogue between internal, systemic dynamics and external, contingent events. Reconciling these two forces is perhaps the biggest challenge. Are the stabilizing feedback strong enough to guide the system back to a similar state after a major shock, suggesting a degree of convergence? Or do these shocks send the system down a completely new and unpredictable path every time, suggesting that contingency is king? The answer is likely it depends. It depends on the nature of the system at the time and the scale of the shock. This is an area of active scientific debate and research. We must also be humble about what we don't know. We still do not have a complete theory for the origin of life itself. We can create amino acids and other building blocks of life in the lab, but we do not yet know how to get them to self-assemble into the first replicating, information-storing molecule. This is a fundamental gap in our knowledge. We also have a very limited sample size. We only have one planet that we know of that has life. This makes it impossible to say which features of our world are universal requirements for life and which are just parochial accidents of our own history. Are large moons and plate tectonics essential for any complex biosphere, or are they just the way it happened to work out here? Until we can study other biospheres on other worlds, we are stuck extrapolating from a single data point, which is a statistically treacherous thing to do. So, what are the next tests? The search for life on other worlds, both within our solar system, on places like Mars or the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, and on exoplanets, is the most direct way to address this. The discovery of even simple microbial life elsewhere would be revolutionary. It would allow us to begin to distinguish the universal from the particular, the necessary from the contingent. In the meantime, our work continues here on Earth, refining our models of climate and geology, digging deeper into the fossil record, and exploring the fundamental principles of complex systems. The map of our knowledge is still mostly blank spaces. Let's walk through one final case template, applying our synthesized model to a vivid second-person scenario. Imagine you are standing on a beach. Feel the sand between your toes, the warmth of the sun on your skin, the cool mist from the waves. This seemingly simple, timeless scene is a product of all the nested evolutionary processes we have been discussing. Let's break it down. The sand itself is a product of geological evolution. These tiny grains are the weathered remains of mountains that were pushed up by plate tectonics hundreds of millions of years ago and have been slowly eroding ever since. The sand is a form of stored information about a lost mountain range. The rhythm of the waves is governed by the moon, a legacy of that ancient planetary collision, and the subsequent tidal evolution that has stabilized our world. The water in the ocean is here because the Earth's temperature, regulated by long-term geochemical feedback loops, has remained in the narrow range where water can be a liquid. Now look at the life around you. The seaweed washed up on the shore, the seagulls overhead, the tiny crabs skittering in the sand. Each is a product of billions of years of biological evolution. Their DNA a library of survival strategies passed down through countless generations. The very air you are breathing, rich with oxygen, was created by ancient photosynthetic life. This single peaceful moment on the beach is an intersection point of cosmic, geological, and biological history. It is a place where all these different scales of evolution converge. You are not just an observer of this scene, you are a product of it. The salt in your blood has a similar concentration to the salt in the ocean, a relic of the time when our distant ancestors lived in the sea. Your body's internal clock is tuned to the 24-hour day created by the Earth's slowing rotation. Your eyes are sensitive to the specific wavelengths of light that our sun produces. You are a walking, breathing archive of the planet's history. Seeing the world this way does not diminish its beauty or its mystery. It enhances it. It transforms a simple walk on the beach into a profound experience of connection and belonging, a deep time awareness of the intricate, multi-layered processes that have made this moment possible. So how can we translate this vast intellectual model into our daily lives? The goal is not to live in a state of constant abstract analysis, but to cultivate a different quality of attention, a way of perceiving the world that is informed by this deeper understanding. Here are a few small testable practices. The first is to practice seeing in layers. The next time you are outside, whether in a city park or a wilderness area, pick one object, a tree, a rock, a building, and consciously try to see the different timescales embedded within it. See the tree's annual growth in its bark and branches, the decades of its life. Then imagine the centuries of the forest it is a part of, and the deep geological time of the rock and soil beneath it. This is not an intellectual exercise, but an imaginative one. It stretches your sense of time and helps you see the present moment as a deep, multi-layered phenomenon. Another practice is to trace the connections. Pick a simple object in your room, like a glass of water. Where did the water come from? Trace its journey from a cloud to rain, to a river or aquifer, through pipes to your tap. Where did the glass come from? Trace it back to sand, to a factory, to the energy that melted the sand. This practice helps to dissolve the illusion of separate, isolated objects and reveals the vast, interconnected network of natural and human systems that supports your existence. A final practice is to pay attention to your own body as a system. Notice the feedback loops of hunger and satiety, of tiredness and wakefulness, of stress and relaxation. Your body is not a machine to be controlled, but a complex, self-regulating ecosystem to be listened to and collaborated with. These practices are not about moralizing or prescribing a certain way to live. They are simply tools for cultivating awareness. They are ways of training our attention to perceive the hidden connections, the deep time stories, and the systemic nature of the world we inhabit, starting with the immediate, tangible reality of our own lives. What does the future hold? Our synthesized model, which emphasizes the interplay of stabilizing feedbacks, contingent shocks, and tipping points, gives us a framework for thinking about plausible future scenarios. It's crucial to label this as bounded speculation, not prediction. We are exploring the space of possibilities, not forecasting a single outcome. One possibility is a future of continued relative stability, what is known in systems thinking as a dynamic equilibrium. In this scenario, our planetary systems, though stressed, remain within their resilient range. The negative feedback loops continue to dominate, and the climate stabilizes in a new, warmer state, but one that is still broadly habitable. This is a future where humanity, perhaps through a combination of technological innovation and a deeper ecological wisdom, learns to operate within the planet's boundaries. Another possibility is that we push the system across one or more critical tipping points. We've discussed the potential for Amazon dieback. Other known tipping points include the melting of the Greenland and West Antarctic ice sheets, the shutdown of major ocean currents like the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, and the thawing of permafrost, which would release vast amounts of methane, a potent greenhouse gas. If these tipping points are crossed, the stabilizing negative feedbacks could be overwhelmed by amplifying positive feedbacks, leading to rapid, irreversible changes and a transition to a hothouse Earth state, a world fundamentally less hospitable to human civilization. The confidence levels on where exactly these tipping points lie are still quite low, but the risk is real and significant. A third, less discussed possibility is one of radical, unforeseen novelty. Complex systems are capable of surprising, emergent behavior. The future may not just be a continuation of past trends. Just as the emergence of photosynthesis was a planetary game-changer, it's possible that new technological or social innovations could emerge that fundamentally alter the dynamics of the human planet system in ways we cannot currently imagine, for better or for worse. The key takeaway from our exploration is that the future is not a predetermined path. It is a landscape of possibilities with deep valleys of stability, precarious ridges, and unexplored territories. The path we take will be a product of both the system's inherent dynamics and the choices we make. How can we emotionally reframe this complex and at times unsettling picture of the world? The intellectual model of a planet governed by feedbacks, tipping points, and deep time forces can feel abstract and alienating. It can make us feel small and powerless. But there is another way to hold this understanding, a way that fosters a sense of calm, connection, and meaning. We can shift our emotional center of gravity from a focus on control to a focus on participation. We are not the masters of this system. We are not its engineers. We are participants. We are a part of its metabolism. This can be a source of great relief. We don't have to carry the weight of the world on our shoulders. We just have to play our part, to tend to our small corner of the vast, interconnected network with as much care and awareness as we can muster. We can also find a deep sense of belonging in this story. The story of the universe, of the planet, of life is our story. The iron in our blood was forged in the heart of a dying star. The water in our cells has cycled through rain and rivers for eons. The electrical impulses in our brains follow the same physical laws that shape the galaxies. We are not strangers here. We are made of this place. We belong to this long, unbroken chain of becoming. This perspective can cultivate a profound sense of awe and gratitude, not just for the beautiful things we see, but for the underlying elegance and resilience of the systems that make it all possible. It is a mature, quiet kind of wonder, one that has looked at the chaos and the contingency and the vast, impersonal nature of the cosmos, and has still found a reason for reverence. It's the feeling of being a small but meaningful part of a story that is far older, far larger, and far more mysterious than our own individual lives. This brings us to a philosophical boundary, the line where scientific data ends and the search for meaning begins. Science can describe the what and the how of the universe with incredible power and detail. It can tell us about the mechanisms of natural selection, the chemistry of the stars, and the feedback loops of the climate. But it cannot tell us the why. It cannot tell us if there is a purpose or a meaning to it all. It cannot answer questions like, why is there something rather than nothing? Or, what is our place and purpose in the cosmos? These are not scientific questions. They are questions of meaning, of value, of philosophy and spirituality. Our exploration tonight has brought us right up to the edge of this territory. We have seen a world that appears to be finely tuned for life, a world of intricate self-regulation and emergent complexity. It is natural, when faced with this evidence, to ask if there is some intention behind it. Is there a design? This is a valid and deeply human question, but it is a question that science is not equipped to answer. The scientific method, by its very nature, looks for natural, mechanistic explanations. It operates under the assumption of methodological naturalism. It cannot prove or disprove the existence of a purpose or a designer that exists outside of that natural framework. So, we are left at this boundary with a choice of interpretation. One person can look at the evidence we've discussed and see the workings of a divine intelligence, a cosmic mind guiding the unfolding of the universe. Another person can look at the very same evidence and see the beautiful, awe-inspiring power of mindless, emergent processes, self-organization, feedback, and selection, operating over vast scales of time and space, with the anthropic principle explaining why we find ourselves in a place where such processes could lead to us. The crucial point is that both of these interpretations are compatible with the scientific evidence. The evidence itself does not force us to choose one over the other. Science provides the description of the world. The meaning we derive from that description is something we bring to it. And this is where a certain kind of humility is required. We must be willing to hold the questions open, to live in the mystery, to acknowledge the limits of our own way of knowing. Whether you see the world as a creation or as a magnificent accident, the appropriate response is one of wonder, of reverence for the incredible, complex, and beautiful reality in which we find ourselves. Let's place these two powerful frames, one of anthropic emergence, the other of design, side by side, not as adversaries in a debate, but as parallel paths to a similar sense of awe. The frame of emergence, which is the native language of science, tells a story of profound creativity inherent in the universe itself. It suggests that the laws of physics and chemistry are not just a sterile set of rules, but a recipe for complexity. Given enough time, energy, and interconnected parts, order and beauty will spontaneously arise from chaos. In this view, the universe is not a static stage on which a pre-written drama unfolds. It is an active, ongoing process of creation. It is constantly exploring new possibilities, discovering new forms of stability and complexity. The wonder here comes from the realization that everything we see, from a galaxy to a human brain, is a product of this bottom-up, self-organizing creativity. We are not the pinnacle of a planned creation. We are a fleeting, beautiful ripple in a self-creating cosmos. There is a deep humility in this view, a letting go of our own specialness and a recognition of our kinship with all emergent phenomena, with stars and snowflakes and river deltas, the frame of design tells a different kind of story, but one that can arrive at a similar emotional place. In this view, the intricate order, the fine-tuning of physical constants, and the emergent complexity we observe are all pointers to an underlying intelligence, a purpose that guides the unfolding of the universe. The laws of nature are not just a given, they are the expression of a deeper logic, a cosmic grammar. The wonder here comes from the feeling of being part of a meaningful story, a grand narrative that has a direction and a purpose. It is the sense that the beauty and complexity of the world are not just happy accidents but reflections of a deeper reality. This view can foster a profound sense of gratitude and responsibility, a feeling of being entrusted with the care of a sacred creation. What is remarkable is that both of these frames, when held with intellectual honesty and emotional openness, can lead to the same ethical and aesthetic conclusions. A deep reverence for the natural world, a commitment to its preservation, and a sense of profound humility in the face of its complexity and mystery. Whether you see the world as an emergent poem or a divine text, the act of reading it with care and attention is the same. And so, we arrive back where we began, with you, in this room. In this moment, you are not outside of this vast, evolving system looking in. You are in the loop. You are a living, breathing, thinking part of the process. The long story of the universe is not something that happened in the past. It is happening now, through you. The legacy of stardust is in your bones. The memory of the ancient oceans is in your blood. The code of 4 billion years of life is written in your cells. The complex neural network in your skull, which allows you to contemplate these ideas, is one of the most recent and extraordinary products of this long evolutionary journey. This realization is the ultimate antidote to alienation. You are not a stranger on a hostile planet. You are the planet, grown self-aware. You are the universe, reflecting upon itself. This sense of personal belonging comes with a quiet form of agency. It is the agency of a gardener, not an engineer. It is not about controlling the system, but about understanding it, listening to it, and participating in it with wisdom and care. Your attention, your choices, your actions, they are all inputs into this vast, interconnected system. They are your contribution to the next chapter of this ongoing story. The world is not something that happens to you. It is something that happens with you. You are a co-creator of whatever comes next. Let's take a moment to retrace the path we have traveled together tonight. We began with a simple, elegant question. What if we never evolved? We used this question not to find a single answer, but as a lens to explore the nature of change and stability. We grounded ourselves in our present sensory reality and then journeyed out into deep time and planetary scale. We followed multiple tracks of evidence, from the small, branching patterns of life to the large, self-regulating feedbacks of the planet. We looked at the stabilizing presence of our moon, the deep archives of rock and ice, the conversations between biomes and atmosphere, the coded language of DNA, and the slow dance of the continents. We paused to consider our own methods, our biases, and the limits of our knowledge. We made a turn, reframing our question from a simple binary to a rich continuum of stability and change. We then built a synthesized model of evolution as a nested, multi-scale process of information storage and selection. We walked through what this means on a human scale in a single moment on a beach. And finally, we arrived at the philosophical boundary where science meets meaning and located ourselves personally within this vast and ancient story. We now return to our core question one last time, but with a new understanding. A world without evolution would not just be a world without humans or without life. It would be a world without memory, without creativity, without resilience. It would be a world without a story. As our journey comes to a close, I want to extend a quiet thank you. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for lending your time and your attention to this shared exploration. In a world that so often demands speed and certainty, it is a rare and valuable thing to be able to slow down, to sit with uncertainty, and to simply be curious together. Your presence here, in this silent, scattered community of listeners, is what makes these journeys possible. There is no need to do anything. Just rest in this shared space of quiet contemplation. The questions we've explored will remain, and that is as it should be. The goal was never to arrive at a final destination, but to appreciate the journey itself. And so, with gratitude for your companionship, we can now let these ideas begin to soften, to dissolve into the background as you prepare for sleep. Let the tension release from your shoulders, from your jaw, from the space between your eyebrows. Let go of the need to hold on to any particular concept or idea. The information has been absorbed, and your mind can now be still. Allow the gentle rhythm of your breathing to be your only anchor, in and out, each breath a simple, quiet affirmation of your place in the world. The grand cosmic story we have been telling finds its most intimate expression in this simple, physical act. The universe breathes, the planet breathes, and you breathe. It is all one and the same process, happening at different scales, at different tempos. There are no final answers tonight, only a deeper appreciation for the questions. The mystery of the world is not a problem to be solved, it is a reality to be lived in. And as you drift towards sleep, you can rest in that mystery. You can find a sense of peace, not in knowing everything, but in knowing that you are a part of something vast, ancient, and beautiful. A part of a story that is still being written in the silent, steady unfolding of the night. And now, come back one last time to the room around you. The air, still and quiet, holds the legacy of ancient starlight and the breath of distant forests. The materials of your bed, the wood in the floor, the glass in the window, all are temporary arrangements of matter that has been cycling through this planet for eons. The low hum of the house is the sound of energy flowing, a tiny tributary of the great river of cosmic energy that animates everything. And the steady, quiet beat of your own heart is the rhythm of life itself, a rhythm that has persisted and adapted and evolved through unimaginable stretches of time. You are a convergence point, a place where the history of the universe has become conscious of itself. And as you finally let go, as you release your awareness into the quiet expanse of sleep, you are not ending your participation in this story. You are simply entering a different phase of it. You are returning to the deep, silent, restorative source from which all complexity and all awareness arise. You are part of the process. You are home. Rest now.